The lesson that we're about to preach, you're going to have to stay focused on. Okay? You're going to have to stay focused. This is kind of an in-depth type of a study. It's a survey, so you cover a lot of information in a brief amount of time, and that's what makes it so difficult. And the introduction is about 3 lessons long. So we're going to be here for quite some time this morning. Okay? But let's start off with this. Our discussion centers upon the kingdom of God. And Paul writes about that in Romans 14, verse 17. And it is going to be the focus of our study this morning. Notice what he says. For the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost. Sadly, when we talk about the kingdom today, most denominations do not understand the nature of the kingdom of God. Most individuals in the denominational world believe that there is a distinction between the church and the kingdom. They believe the church is one thing, the kingdom is something else. And yet, Jesus made the two synonymous in Matthew 16, verses 18 and 19. Upon this rock I will build my church, he told Peter, and I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom. The church and the kingdom, as far as Jesus was concerned, were one and the same. Another interesting thing that the denominational world says is this. The kingdom of God is physical in nature. They believe that it is going to be established upon this earth. They believe that Jesus will sit on the literal throne of David and that He's going to rule upon that throne for 1,000 years. And yet Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. John 19, verse 36, or 18, verse 36. Another thing that's interesting is they believe that the kingdom is not here yet. Jesus came the first time to establish an earthly kingdom. The Jews rejected Him. He left this earth, and one of these days, though, He's coming back, and He's going to set up that kingdom in the literal city of Jerusalem. I find that interesting because it was Paul who told the Colossians that they were already in the kingdom. Paul says, who hath delivered us out of the power of darkness, and hath translated us into the kingdom of His dear Son. How in the world can you be in something that doesn't exist yet? That's an impossibility. The kingdom is here according to the Scriptures. So the denominational world, when we talk about the kingdom, doesn't understand fully what we're talking about. Now notice that the kingdom is nothing more than a figure of speech given by God in order to help us understand the nature of the church for which Jesus died. In other words, the church and the kingdom, as we said before, are one and the same thing. They are just two different descriptions of exactly the same institution. When we talk about the church being a kingdom, we are talking about a nation of people. Isn't that what Peter said in 1 Peter 2 verse 9? But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, listen to him, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of Him who hath called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. We are a what? We are a holy nation of people. We are a spiritual kingdom, my friends. The church is the spiritual kingdom, just like Israel in the Old Testament was the physical kingdom of God. There are many characteristics of a kingdom, 3 predominantly. Number 1, there is a monarch, a ruler, a head, one who oversees the kingdom. And as far as the church is concerned, that's Jesus Christ, which in His times He shall show who is the blessed and only potentate, the King of kings and Lord of lords. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 15. Secondly, there also has to be a law, doesn't there? In order for there to be a kingdom, there has to be something, a law, legislation that governs that kingdom, and you and I live under what is known as the royal law of liberty, according to James chapter 1, verse 25. And lastly, there must be citizens of that kingdom. You and I are citizens of the United States. The Bible tells us if we are Christians, then we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven. For our conversation is in heaven. Philippians 3, verse 20. That little word conversation there can be translated citizenship. Our citizenship is above. Now what's interesting about this kingdom is this. God gave this kingdom in order to unite all humanity one with another. Right now the world is quite divided, is it not? There's all kinds of cultures, there's all kinds of languages, there's all kinds of people, there's all kinds of skin tones in all of the nations. There's all kinds of practices, there's all kinds of ideals, there's all kinds of beliefs. And God wanted to bring all of these individuals together in one body or into one nation, the church. One of the great divides in the first century was between Jew and Gentile, wasn't it? And that divide was serious. Those individuals had absolutely no fellowship one with another. In fact, not only did they not have fellowship with one another, there were individuals on both sides who literally hated each other just because they were a Jew or a Gentile. It's amazing, isn't it? They could have cared less about the individual. If you just said you were a Jew, a Gentile despised you. If you said you were a Gentile, then the Jew despised you. Ooh, those old Jews and Gentiles. We find too, the practices of those two cultures were extremely divided one from another, were they not? The Jews were monotheistic. They worshiped one God. They lived under a particular law that separated them from the rest of the laws of all people, the law of Moses. The Gentiles, on the other hand, had their own laws made by man. They also were idol worshipers. They were polytheists. Those individuals worship many gods. Think about that. We're trying to get these two groups to what? Come together in one body. You see, that's what the church was designed to do. To get these warring nations, these individuals that hated each other, these individuals that couldn't fellowship one another, to come together in one place. And that's the church. Paul discusses that a lot in Ephesians 2. Notice what he says. For He, that's Jesus, is our peace. Now notice what he says. Who hath made both, that's Jew and Gentile, what? One. God wanted to bring these two groups of individuals, Jews and Gentiles, together in one body, in one nation. Bring them together as one people, the church. Notice in Ephesians 2, verse 16, what Paul says. And that He might reconcile, that is, make friendly, both, that's Jew and Gentile, where? In one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby. He wants to bring everybody together where? In one body, in the church. Now here's something that's interesting that he tells the Gentiles in verse 19. Ye are no more what? Ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the house of God. You see, used to be only the Jews were citizens of God's kingdom. It used to be that those Gentiles were alienated. They were strangers. They were separated from the covenants of promise. Not anymore. Not under the New Testament. God wants to bring Jew and Gentile together in one body, the church. My friends, the church is the holy nation of God. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. When those Jews and Gentiles were brought together, it was not an easy, smooth, immediate blending together of those two people. Can you imagine? A Jew's baptized in the River Jordan. He walks off, and then a Jew follows him. He's baptized, and he goes over to the same side of the shore, and now the Jew and Gentile just hug and love each other, even though they've hated each other for hundreds of years. That's crazy, folks. There were bumps in the road when these groups of individuals were brought together. Take, for instance, circumcision. Wasn't that a pretty big deal? Circumcision is what made a Jew a Jew. It was the very thing that distinguished the Jew from the Gentile. They referred to themselves as the circumcision. They referred to the Gentile as the uncircumcision. And now here they are together. Got to love one another. I got to hug that old uncircumcision dude. That didn't go over very well. How about this one? Clean and unclean distinctions. Under the old law, some things were clean, some things were unclean. Here you are, a Jew. You grew up the entirety of your life and you never ate a sausage. Because that's a pig. You can't eat a pig under Judaism. And here you are, a Gentile, and guess what? You've had bacon your whole life. And now you got to come together and love each other. It was a hard thing to do. Another one. There was meat that was sold in the marketplace that had been offered unto idols in Gentile worship. Can you imagine that? The Gentile enters into his temple. He makes sacrifices of his gods, to his gods, with all of this meat. Then he takes it right out to the marketplace and sells it. Do you eat that meat or not? Especially if you knew where it came from. That's what people say about spam and stuff like that, right? If you knew where it came from. What about the observance of days? In Judaism, they observed all kinds of days, did they not? It wasn't just the Sabbath. There was the Passover. There was the day of Pentecost. There was the Day of Atonement. There was the new moons, on and on and on. They had all kinds of days. Well, all of a sudden, the old law is gone. The new law is here. What do we do with those days when they roll around? Do we observe them? Do we not observe them? And guess what? The Gentiles didn't observe any of them. They meant absolutely nothing to a Gentile. Can you see how that would be a difficult thing to bring these individuals together? Think about it. They had been cultures and nations for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And they have been practicing what they believed to be the truth all of those years, and now they come together. Ooh-wee. It was not an easy transition. It wasn't easy to bring all of these differences together and try then to unite in Jesus Christ. But you know what's wonderful for us? In the New Testament, there are various chapters, there are various books of the Bible, in fact, that talk about these differences. And not only do they talk about the differences, they also show us how these individuals worked through those problems and worked through those difficulties in order to maintain unity and love in the body of Christ. And our passage, Romans 14:17, falls right in the middle of one of those discussions. What does Paul say? He says this, "For the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Ghost." Here's the question. What in the world is Paul talking about? You might as well just turn to Romans, the 14th chapter, because that's where we're going to be spending the bulk of our time. Here's a lesson of Bible study. Never go into the Bible and just pull a passage out of its context and try to make it say something. Don't ever do that. There are individuals who do that with 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. As it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which the Lord hath prepared for them that love Him. That passage is used in funerals all the time. People say, see there, he's talking about heaven. No, he's not. You go in and look at the context, he's not discussing heaven at all. He is talking about divine revelation that's in the mind of God that hasn't been given yet. You see, you can pull a passage out of its context and make it say just about anything, can't you? So we want to stay within the context. As far as Romans 14:17 is concerned, the whole chapter is the context. Okay, the whole chapter, from beginning at verse 1 all the way to the very last verse. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to look at the chapter very briefly. I've divided it into 4 sections. Number 1, the controversy. The controversy involved eating of meats. 14 times the word eat or eaten is mentioned in this chapter. 4 times we read about the word meat. That tells me eating of meats has to be something that's going on in this context. According to verse 14, the issue surrounded clean and unclean meats. Remember the Jews? They had very strict dietary laws. Some things were acceptable, some things were forbidden. Now they've come together in one body with a group of individuals who have no distinctions as far as meat is concerned. They'll eat anything that moves just about. And a Jew sees that and he goes, oh, you're kidding me. Some would eat the unclean meats. Some refused to eat. Notice the text, what the text says in verse 2. For one believeth that he may what? Eat all things. Not everybody, though. Another who is weak eateth herbs. I'm not eating that bad meat. I'm just going to eat herbs. I know that's good. And so now we have what? We have the meat eaters and the herb eaters in the church. Didn't know we had dinosaurs, did you? That's what it almost sounds like, doesn't it? Now, folks, that problem right there, that issue, caused a great deal of conflict in the church. And in the next section, verses 4 through 13, Paul talks about the conflict. And he looks at some of the considerations, and one of the big issues was judging one another. Notice how he begins this section. Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? See, the Jew would look at a Gentile who is eating unclean meat and go, you're not supposed to eat that. The Gentile would look at the Jew who refused to eat and would be nibbling on lettuce or something. And they'd say, look at that guy, he's crazy. I'm going to eat my steak. I'm going to eat my pork chop. He can have all the lettuce he wants, but not me. And they were judging one another in that congregation. Even when you get to verse 13, Paul is still focused on what? They're judging. Let no man what? Let no man therefore judge one another anymore. Quit the judging. Pretty powerful statement that he makes. You see, the reason that the judging was wrong is because the issue about which we are speaking was a matter of liberty. It was a matter of option. It wasn't a doctrinal matter. Keep that in your mind. If you don't remember anything else, you remember that one point. Okay? In the next section, he starts issuing some commands to these individuals. And what I find interesting is the commands are really given to those who will eat meat, more so than those who did not eat meat. Notice one of the commands. Destroy him not with thy meat. Verse 15. Another command. Let not your good be evil spoken of. Another command. Let us follow peace with what? Or let us follow the things which make for peace, he says. Those are the commands that he's given in this text. And it's right in the middle of that he makes this statement. For the kingdom is not meat and drink, but what? Righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost. He ends this particular chapter talking about the conscience of a man. You see in the final section, he says, do not defile a man's conscience and become a stumbling block to him. It's amazing to me in the church that we don't know really what a stumbling block is as far as the Bible is concerned. There's only 2 chapters really that talk about a stumbling block. Romans 14 and then also 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Notice, if an act violates an individual's conscience, take for instance, I'm a Jew and I think eating pork is wrong. A Gentile brother comes along and he knows that I know in my heart that I shouldn't eat that, but he just keeps pushing me. Oh, come on, Vic. There's nothing wrong with a pork chop. Eat that pork chop. It's good. I had 3 last night. Come on. It's good for you. It's the other white meat, I've been told. And finally, what do? I give in. And I eat a pork chop. And I go home and the rest of the day, my conscience has bothered me. My conscience has been violated. I can't believe I did that. I've never eaten pork. I've never eaten anything that is unclean. And his conscience just gnaws away at him. Folks, the Bible says that the individual who caused him to eat has been a stumbling block to that individual. Paul summarizes it in the very last verse of the chapter. He says this, and he that doubteth is what? Damned if he eat. Why? Because he eateth not of faith. And whatsoever is not of faith is sin. You see, if I don't understand that what I am doing is in harmony with the will of God, even though it's a matter of liberty, I can offend my conscience. And whoever causes me to do that is a stumbling block to me. He has caused me to sin. Now there's the chapter in a nutshell. Now see, I told you we're going to fly through this stuff. You're going to have to go back home and do a lot of studying tonight. Let's talk about the commentary as far as our verse is concerned. Again, our passage falls in section 3 under the commands that Paul is issuing to this particular church. Under the New Testament, all meats were clean, weren't they? When Paul talks about the falling away in 1 Timothy chapter 4, beginning of verse 3, he mentions 2 doctrines of the falling away. Forbidding to marry and what? Commanding to abstain from meats. But then Paul goes on to describe those meats. Notice what he says. Which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them that believe and know the truth. All meat is okay to be eaten today. If you want to eat a goat, eat a goat. If you want to eat a pig, eat a pig. If you want to eat a sheep, eat a sheep. If you want to eat bass, eat bass. If you want to eat catfish, eat catfish. All meats are good. That doesn't mean you like them all. It just means they're good. Now, since that was true, watch this. It was good to eat meat, wasn't it? It's okay. It's good. What'd you have for supper last night? Oh, man. We had some big old catfish fillets. That sounds good. Now, note this, though. What Paul says in Romans 14, verse 16. Let not your good what? Be evil spoken of. Now that's a pretty powerful statement, isn't it? Who would ever say something that is good is evil? Right here. Eating meat can destroy my brother or sister in Christ. He sees me eat, so he goes on and eats. He violates his conscience, and now he's in sin. I'm destroying the faith of my brother. Question. What good is good if it brings harm? And that's the whole point. What good is good if it brings harm? I want you to think about the person who likes to eat catfish. You tell him, now wait a minute, you really don't need to do that, because if you do, you're going to cause your brother to sin. What's the first thing you're going to say? Oh, come on, preacher. Meat's good. There's nothing wrong with eating meats. Paul even wrote about it over there in 1 Timothy chapter 4. Meats are created to be received with thanksgiving. And now you're telling me, don't eat the meat. Paul answers with this statement. For the kingdom of God is not meat and drink, but what? Righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost. What does he mean by that? Folks, meat and drinks were matters of liberty. And guess what? The kingdom is not founded upon them. The kingdom is not founded upon matters of option. What do you mean by that, Vic? What I mean by that is this. The kingdom is not founded upon things that we can either take or leave off. Every member of the church could eat meat and the church would be strong and healthy. But watch this. Every member of the church could eat herbs and refuse to eat meat. And guess what? The church would be strong and would be healthy. That lets me know what? Eating of meats is optional. It's not a foundational matter as far as the kingdom is concerned. The kingdom is not what? The kingdom is not meat and drink. Folks, there were spiritual matters in the kingdom that are much more important than those matters of option. Did you know that? And Paul makes mention of 3 of them. Number 1, righteousness. The kingdom is founded upon righteousness. Notice that little word righteousness, it contains a root word right, doesn't it? What is righteousness? Righteousness very simply is this, the doing of right. Now here's the interesting thing. The standard of right is not in my own mind. Each person doesn't get to determine what is right and what is wrong. There is a standard of what is right. And that standard is the commands of God. Isn't that what the psalmist said? All thy commandments are righteousness. Now watch this. God never did command the eating of meats. He says you can do it. But He didn't say you have to do it. You can't show me a passage where God ever said, you have to eat a ribeye steak. It's not in there. But here's another point. God never commanded us to refrain from eating meats, did He? Don't you dare eat a ribeye. Can't find that one either. But you want to know what He did command? He did command such things as this. Love one another. Forbear one another. And in honor to prefer one another. Those are commandments. Those are things that God expects of us. Those are a part of His righteousness. So what if you can't eat a steak? What's more important? Righteousness is more important. Doing what God commands is more important than that. The second thing that he mentions is this, peace. He says that's a part of the foundations of the kingdom, peace. Peace is the absence of strife. It's the absence of turmoil. It's the absence of bickering one another. Remember what was going on at Rome? They were judging one another. They were bickering with one another. They were arguing with one another over the eating of meats. Paul says that's not what the kingdom is all about. Guys, the kingdom was not designed to produce warfare among brothers and sisters in Christ. Remember what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14? He says, for He, Christ, is our what? He's our peace. That's why Jesus came. To make peace with one another. Not to cause us to fight and argue. If there are matters of option, then guess what? They're not to be fought over. If they're going to cause friction, if they're going to cause trouble, guess what? Leave it off, Paul says. And sadly, there are many people, they could care less. They're going to do whatever they want to do. Notice what Paul says in Galatians 5:15. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed that you be not consumed one of another. Folks, let me tell you something. If we keep fighting and arguing over matters of option, matters of liberty, guess what? We will eventually kill ourselves. We'll eventually eat ourselves up, won't we? He also says that the kingdom is founded upon what? Joy. Joy. Joy is the internal condition that exists within us as a result of what? Of peace. It's that feeling deep within that everything is okay. Everything is wonderful. Have you ever walked into a congregation that was in strife and turmoil? It's miserable, is it not? And it is not what God wants. It's not the way God designed His kingdom. Now sometimes there has to be strife. Sometimes there has to be turmoil when there's doctrinal issues involved. But when it's matters of liberty, when it's matters of option, there should be no turmoil. I find it interesting that love, joy, peace are the first three elements of the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5, 22 and 23. Now the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. Wow. Now, I told you we were going to get into this pretty deep, didn't I? Now you're sitting there scratching your head and you're going, man, what's all this got to do with us? That eating of meat stuff, that was 2,000 years ago. We don't argue about catfish and pork chops anymore, Vic. Question. Are there still matters of option within the church today? There are. How about a few of them? The use of sound versions of the Bible. Underline the word sound. Because there are some unsound versions of the Scripture. I grew up, I trained, I memorized the King James Version. I always will use it. But there's other good versions, aren't there? The New King James Version. What are we going to do? We're going to fight and wrangle and argue over that? As long as you've got a sound version, it shouldn't be a problem. How about this one? Building a fellowship hall with church funds. Now the reason I put that one in is because I was personally involved in an argument over that at a congregation on one occasion. They were building a new building. Didn't have a fellowship hall. The members wanted a fellowship hall except for one man. Oh, what a misery it was. Do you have to have a fellowship hall? No, don't have to. Can you have a fellowship hall? Yes, you can have one. Boy, it was a struggle for about a year and a half at that congregation over that one little issue. How about this one? The celebration of Christmas and Easter. Now notice that in one's personal life. Nowhere in the Bible are Christmas and Easter ever commanded to be celebrated. If it is, you show it to me and we'll start celebrating it. But what if an individual says something like this? Well, I know Jesus was born. He had to be. The Bible tells me He was. And so when December 25th comes along, I'm going to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And in their house, they put a nativity scene. They get their family together. They read about the birth of Jesus. They talk about the birth of Jesus. They say, give thanks to God that Jesus came and was born. Are they in sin for doing that? Now, I'm another individual who has my house, and guess what? Come Christmas Day, we don't say anything about the birth of Jesus. But I know my next door neighbor does. And he goes to the same church I do. What am I supposed to do? Condemn him? What are you doing? Get that nativity scene up in that house. You need to get that out of your house. What are you doing reading the Bible about the birth of Jesus on December the 25th? Now you can do it 24th, you can do it the 26th, but you can't do it the 25th. See, matters of liberty. Now, see, sometimes matters of liberty make those who don't do it very uncomfortable. Don't they? How about this? How to dress for worship and Bible study. As long as we dress respectfully, as long as we dress modestly, has God set down a list of rules as far as what to wear? You better wear your Joseph A. Bank shirt and tie. What if you put on a Sears coat? That's old, isn't it? If a person just wears a pullover shirt and khakis, another wears a suit and tie, because you're going to have problems if you go down to South America, if you go down to Latin America, and you think that, because guess what? You don't get those people in suits and ties down there. In most places. There's some places that you do, but not very many. But you see, that can become a major problem, can't it? Women wearing a head covering. Now, you don't see that very often anymore. But where my brother attends, if you walk in there, you're going to see about 5 or 6 ladies wearing the little head coverings. What are you supposed to do? What, you got that head covered? I'll get that thing off your head. Is that what you're going to tell them? You push them so hard, they take the head covering off. They think the head covering is supposed to be worn. They violate their conscience. They're in sin, and so are you, because you've put a stumbling block in front of those individuals. Because it's a matter of option. You think God's worried about that head covering? Just because they got a head covering on, God's going, oh, I'm not going to listen to you. How about this one? The indwelling of the Holy Spirit. There's some individuals who believe in a personal indwelling of the Holy Spirit. That He literally resides within you, but He doesn't do anything separate and apart from the Word. There's others, however, who believe the Holy Spirit only indwells, how? Representatively, through the Word of God. The end result of the two beliefs is exactly the same. Did you know that? The end result is exactly the same. So we have a lot, that's just a sampling of some of the issues in the church even today that are matters of what? Liberty and option. Now, I wish we had the time, folks. Because through the course of Romans, the 14th chapter, there are at least 13 principles. I told you I had a lot of sermons in here. There are at least 13 principles that Paul lays down in order to talk about matters of liberty. One of them is this: we should not despise one another. We should not judge one another. We should not divide over those issues. Second thing, it's possible for two beliefs or two practices to exist at one time in the body of Christ as long as they are what? Optional. When we have a worship service or a Bible class, I'm going to be in at least a shirt and tie. Most of the time, coat and tie. Very seldom will I do anything else. But you look around. There's others who are dressed differently than that, aren't there? Am I better than they are? Are they less than I am? Are they better than I am? Am I less than they are? No. Two beliefs existing at the same time. It can happen. As long as it's a matter of what? A matter of option. If you don't think that's true, go out and talk to individuals about the date of the book of Revelation. There's a huge divide over that. 80-70, 80-96. Just depends on the preacher you're talking to. How about this? Our beliefs and our actions have a tremendous impact on other people. Paul says we don't live unto ourselves and we don't die unto ourselves. Folks, this world ain't all about you, nor is it all about me. And what I do and how I act and what I say and what I do to others has an impact on them. And we need to remember that. There's some matters that we leave the judging to who? We leave the judging to God. And Paul makes mention of that in the chapter. So then every one of us shall give an account of himself unto God. How about this next one? We should not be a stumbling block to our brethren. We've talked about that one, haven't we? Or this one. And this is what's interesting. There must be constant teaching and discussion going on about these matters, folks. That's our problem, though. You know what? There were individuals in the first century who would not eat meats offered to idols sold in the marketplace. They were Gentiles. They knew what that meat had been used for. And guess what? They didn't want to eat meats that were offered to those idols. I'm not eating that stuff. Paul told them this. We know that an idol is nothing in the world. In fact, he says, we know that there's only one God in the world. There really aren't any gods at all other than God in this world. You see, they needed that understanding, didn't they? And the more they understood that, the more they realized what was going on, the more they would mature, and eventually, guess what they might do? They might eat those meats of faith. I understand now. And the same could happen in Romans the 14th chapter. Somebody begins to understand, all meats are good now. And I need to understand, didn't Peter have to be taught that? In Acts chapter 10, he'd gone for years as a Christian, and guess what? He says what? I have never eaten anything unclean. You live under the new covenant, Peter. Why haven't you? Because he came out of what? Judaism. Was he wrong for never eating unclean meat? No. It was a matter of what? Option, wasn't it? How about this next one? Love needs to be involved in our discussions and in our practices. Paul asked this question, will we destroy a brother over a matter of option and liberty? How about this next one? A person can be absolutely right and still harm his brother. That's scary, isn't it? We should follow the things that make for what? For peace, Paul says. And he also says this, sometimes it's good for us to withdraw our right for our brothers and sisters in Christ. If we're going to have a fellowship meal and you don't want to eat pork, then guess what I'm not going to bring to that fellowship meal? I'm not going to bring my pork. It's okay. Even though it's my favorite meal. You see, sometimes I withdraw my right in order to show you love and concern and compassion. Or this one. Some issues we just hold between us and God, don't we? And we'll stand before God in the last day and we'll give an account of those things. And then there's the last one. Do not engage in an optional matter if it involves what? The violation of your conscience. Don't do that. We're going to build that fellowship hall I made mention to you about, and one man didn't want us to build it. You know what we told him? Brother Isom, if you don't want to be a part of it, just stay home. As soon as the worship is over, you don't have to fellowship in that fellowship hall. You can just go home. And we will never force you, we will never make you eat in that building. Why? Because we will never make you violate your conscience. Ever. And what was interesting, he got so mad that he left the church, went down the road to another church that already had a fellowship hall. Now get that. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Folks, what we have to remember is what the kingdom is really all about. Righteousness, peace, and joy. That's what the kingdom's about. I want you to think about, what if Paul had not addressed this topic? The first thing that would have happened is there would have been a huge split at the Church of Rome. We've already talked about it. You'd have one church over here that were the meat eaters, and you had another church over here, the herb eaters. You'd have come to town and they'd had to ask you, are you an herb eater or a meat eater? The herb eaters eat on 4th Street, the meat eaters eat on 5th Street. Thank you. Unbelievable. Or you walk into an herb eater's place and you're a meat, I don't need to be here, I'm a meat eater. It could happen, couldn't it? Has happened. Souls could have been lost, folks. Have you ever been part of conflict? Have you ever been part of strife? What happens? Individuals get discouraged, don't they? And in both camps, there are going to be some individuals who say, if this is what Christianity is about, I'm having no part of it, and they leave. There could have also been the forcing of issues, causing individuals to offend their conscience, and more sin would have been committed. Or this one, the influence of the church could have been destroyed in the city of Rome, couldn't it? Look at them Christians. They just fight and argue over what you can eat and what you can't eat. Is that what you want published out there in the community? It ruins your influence, doesn't it? Both sides of those issues had obligations and responsibilities, and both of them needed to hear the things that Paul had said. Charity needs to be practiced in matters of option. And the kingdom and its foundational issues ought to be our main concern. And if you've got to give up a matter of option, guess what? Give it up. It's just what? It's just a matter of option. Told you it was a rough study, didn't I? Maybe you're not a member of the kingdom, but guess what? You can be. God wants you in His kingdom. He wants you to be a citizen. And the steps are simple, isn't it? You must be born again. That's what Jesus said in John 3, verse 3. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except you be born again, you cannot enter into what? The kingdom of God. Being born again involves being born of water and of the Spirit, obeying the teachings of the Spirit, being submersed in water for the forgiveness of sins. And Jesus said that if you do those two things, you can see the kingdom of heaven. John 3, verse 5. Maybe you're here today, you're outside of that kingdom, and we want you to be a part of it. Obey the gospel and do that. Maybe you're an erring child of God. You've not lived like a kingdom citizen. You need to repent of those sins and ask God to forgive you. If you do, won't you come as together we stand and sing.